The Imperium of Man is so foundational to Warhammer 40k that it's understandable no one could picture the setting without it. I mean, come on now, fellow Xenos fans, odds are good you didn't start your interest here learning of a non-Imperial faction first. Aliens may be cooler, but the Imperium is at the core of everything. But I also feel like that begs the question, what if it didn't exist? What if the Imperium of Man never rose to power, if the Age of Strife came and went and no Imperium came out? How would the galaxy look without the Imperium to pull it out of the darkness into a whole new age of darkness? Well, because I don't feel like reading anything new this week, let's take a look at the potential answers to this question. What if you took the faction core to 40k, especially nowadays, and just erased it? All the named characters are gone, most of the factions that make it up no longer exist as a result of this. What does the setting even look like if you do this? Well, I for one find this question interesting, and as I said, sometimes I don't feel like reading new books or rereading old ones. In the name of laziness and alternate history alike, does this video's topic come about? So let's come up with some fun answers if we can, shall we? Aliens, Chaos, and War would never be the same, so let's go on a fake alternate history exercise because calling it that is less likely to get me made fun of than calling it the fanfiction that it is. But before I begin, do you want to know where you can grab a quick bite to eat? Because you can get just that with Factor, the sponsor of this video. Factor is the meal delivery service sending chef-crafted and dietitian-approved meals straight to your front door. Tired after an overtime shift from hell? Well, Factor just gets popped in the microwave for 2 minutes and you're good to go. No questions asked, no prep work or cleanup required. It's not only all real food and all real ingredients, but it can help you meet the goals you want. 30 grams of protein in almost all the meals, calorie-smart meals, low carb. These are all just a few of the things Factor meals provide for you. And as you can see here, I think they taste good. Personally, I think they taste even better at 3 in the morning because the concept of a sleep schedule has been lost to me, but you can enjoy a Factor whenever you like. I'm not here to judge you for when you eat, I'm just here to tell you these bad boys taste good. To sign yourself up for some Factor, look no further. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code PancreasFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code PancreasFB50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. For a good meal ready quick, there's no better option than Factor, so get yourself some today. Now then, time to piss off Black Templars fans. To undo the Imperium, I figured what point in the setting's history has to change in order to justify it not existing. Something pivotal needs to happen, because once the ball got rolling for its existence, it was essentially inevitable. So, there we go. That'll do it. This is the only way I can think of the Imperium not coming to power. Obviously, the Imperium could survive without Big E's direct guidance. It's been doing that for 10,000 years. But the Imperium was his child, his creation. I feel it's more than safe to say that without the Emperor, nothing like it would exist. Not because I think his unmatched mind was necessary to form it. Anyone familiar with my channel knows what I think about him. And besides, most of the institutions of the Imperium were Malcator's doing. But the Emperor's power and intelligence in the most literal sense of the word to let him create things like the Space Marines and psychic presence forged the empire that would rule for the next 10,000 years. Without him to form it and conquer territory for it in those early years, I don't think you get an Imperium. On the flip side, if you have the Emperor, then you're gonna have an Imperium. His goal was to unite humanity, and he was clearly done being in the background, so even if you rewrite his character to not be a monster, you're still gonna end up with something like the Imperium. Maybe it'd be a Star Trek-style federation of human planets, maybe it'd be even worse if you want to go that angle, and we get a discount interim coalition of governance from the Zeely universe. Either way, if you have Big E, you have the Imperium. So, how do we do that? Well, for this video, I'd say we can kill off the Emperor before he was the Emperor. In this timeline, when the Emperor fights the Void Dragon, he successfully seals it in Mars like he does in canon, but unlike canon, the Void Dragon kills him as well. The wounds suffered by Neoth are too much, and even his perpetual nature can't survive a battle against the material God-given form from the War in Heaven. Among other reasons, I choose this point as the diverging point because it allows the Mechanicus to still form. If the Void Dragon is trapped, as canon has been leaning more and more lore towards, future Martians can one day still come to call him the Machine God. If you don't like that theory and believe it to be anti-Omnissiah slander, then the Void Dragon is still locked away and can't mess with them. Either way, Big E is gone and he isn't coming back, and the Void Dragon isn't here to mess with things either. That said, I think whatever deal he made on the planet Moloch, where he supposedly stole power from the Chaos Gods, works as a good diverging point as well. He tries to steal power from the gods and is unmade for it. With both of these cases, a weaker Emperor is slain by powers beyond him well before he can rise to the prominence he was in by the time of the Great Crusade, where he can much more directly challenge beings like the Chaos Gods themselves. Also, Malcador. I've read the theory that the Emperor was a psychic projection of Malcador. I don't think it's true at all, but just to be absolutely sure we don't get an Imperium, he dies too. Sorry, Mal, no choking out Horus for you this time. I think I'll start with a question that some people might be asking. Is humanity now simply doomed without the Imperium? No, not in the slightest, no. If you think that the Imperium of Man is the only thing that's keeping humanity alive, and without it and the Emperor the species would die out, I invite you to look at Garfield here for a bit. Just because an Imperial book says that's the case doesn't mean it's true. Just because a Primarch or other important character says the Imperium is a necessary evil doesn't make it so. What I will give the Imperium some credit in is ending the Age of Strife faster than it otherwise would have. Not out of the kindness of its heart, but because the Emperor needed things to go fast. He needed his galaxy-spanning empire to be up and running as fast as possible to ensure safety from threats physical and supernatural, from things like the Chaos Gods or the Orcs. He also needed this to be done to ensure a steady flow of resources as well as protection for his Webway project. With the Imperium bringing countless human worlds under its banner, both of these things were solved, he got to be the super dictator of the galaxy, and the various worlds conquered had their ages of strife ended. For these planets, there was no longer terror at the prospect of being alone in the universe post-Long Night. There was a secure society to be a part of. It wasn't a kind or good one, but the Imperium did bring some measure of stability after a galaxy-wide apocalypse. And now, it doesn't. This means that planets that were able to recover quickly from the Age of Strife, relatively speaking, now have to recover on their own. No planetary governors and any potential resources or restructuring from the Imperium will be coming. On their own isn't quite accurate. Even before Gilliman landed on Macleod, for instance, it was able to remain in contact with several neighboring planets and systems, but there will no longer be a superpower providing any measure of security. There's not going to be anything like armies shipped across the galaxy to deal with potential threats. Mankind won't be destroyed by any means. To say otherwise is, quite frankly, blatant favoritism for the Imperium. But without its systems and what those bring with them, such as any STCs it found being put into common use, it'll be a much slower recovery, and some planets will probably be lost that never were in canon. On the flip side of that is that worlds that didn't fit the Emperor's grand designs won't be glassed for not happily agreeing to have the Imperium's boot on its neck for the rest of time, so at worst, I think in terms of lives lost, it'll be a net neutral thing. Some will recover quickly and build small realms of their own, others may be stuck as cavemen for far longer or perhaps permanently, but mankind will continue on. Let's take a brief sidetrack away from explicitly humanity, however. The Men of Iron, created by humanity, but certainly not the same thing. This isn't going to lead to some timeline where the Men of Iron hang around and are totally kicking ass across the galaxy. If nothing else, I've been playing too much Helldivers recently to suffer the idea of those goddamn automatons becoming the stars of the show. And I don't want to give the Emperor credit for ending the rebellion either, both because I just don't think he did, but also because we don't have enough information on it to say anything beyond their rebellion failed. However, I do think robots and artificial intelligence would play a larger role in this version of the 40k galaxy. The Mechanicus certainly didn't need the Emperor to hate AI, but without them joining the Imperium and the Emperor helping it along, their decree of no robots forever wouldn't be able to be enforced as much as it was. And even if you want to assume that every single Men of Iron did rebel, which is factually not true, I'm sure some scientist or other would want to retry things eventually. Make some more robots, they're pretty handy to have around. If you think them going as wrong as they did would ensure no one makes any more of them, then I'll just have to disagree with you. Plenty of tech priests push that envelope in canon as is, and really it'd be like if a caveman got burnt and so we never gave fire any more tries after that. Without the Imperium enforcing a galaxy-wide ban on AI amongst humanity, I can imagine multiple factions out there being interested in AI once more eventually. Plenty will still hate the concept, especially those aligned with whatever the Mechanicus of this timeline looks like, but others will seek to use the tech once more. The Votan managed it perfectly fine with the Ironkin, others no doubt will at least try as well. There may even be AI-centric factions a la the Necrons, but, well, not the Necrons. You know what, there may even be the automatons from Helldivers or some equivalent, because goddammit those clankers are cool, even if they're pure undemocratic evil. As for the Mechanicus, to get them out of the way, they'd likely be where they were before the Imperium came around. With explorator fleets going across the galaxy, the tech priests of Mars had forge worlds and more across the Milky Way even without the Imperium providing them with more resources and manpower. While no Imperium certainly slows the Adeptus Mechanicus down a bit, or the Mechanicum as it would be here, removing the Imperium doesn't simply cause it to fade away into nothingness. But without the Emperor's guidance, in the sense of him guiding their development in a lot of ways, it might look highly different. For example, the Moirai Schism simply doesn't happen. For those unaware, the TLDR of it was that it was the largest civil war the Mechanicus had seen since the Horus Heresy. A heretical Forge World declared that they had managed to translate prophetic messages from the Astronomicon and that the Ecclesiarchy should merge with the Mechanicus. Aside from the fact that no Emperor means no Astronomicon, among other things, the concept of him being the Omnissiah doesn't arise because it doesn't show up on Mars to bring them into the Imperium. So while they don't get to expand as rapidly or safely, they also won't tear themselves apart in that civil war for 1,000 years or so. Who's to say there won't be some equivalent conflict? Tech heresy is hardly uncommon in the Mechanicus, and indeed, if AI is more commonplace in this universe, radical tech priests may join forces with other human factions that support it, causing conflict that way. But they will certainly be a lesser presence as the only Imperial faction to really be around, and while I'd still say they'd be a strong contender in the galaxy, they wouldn't be able to become nearly as dominant as they were. And on that note, I've never really gotten much of an empire-building vibe from them, to be honest, so I don't think they'd be interested in it. You would likely see Mechanicus fiefdoms popping up across the galaxy, especially around night worlds, with some directly aligned under Mars, but I'd wager there's also the possibility of a noticeable amount of what would technically be traitor Forge worlds that broke away from the Mechanicus in this timeline. The Imperium may have caused it to give up a good deal of independence, but the big hats on Mars could also throw the Imperial Guard at a Forge world that was sufficiently misbehaving to them, and now that option doesn't exist. To double back around on something I said earlier though, the Astronomicon not existing. That is going to cause some problems across the galaxy for sure. However, hear me out. Without it, the Imperium does not exist. This is well known. But at least from my understanding of the Astronomicon, this is because it allows the Imperium to exist as a galaxy-spanning empire rather than because it's a direct shield of some sort. Its constant shine is well known as the lighthouse of the galaxy, letting transport and whatnot across the Milky Way work because everyone knows where they're going. Remember that the warp calmed down after Slaanesh was born, however. Smaller scale warp jumps are entirely possible without it. It's rather the fact that without it, we aren't getting a Crusade fleet leaving Terra to the other side of the galaxy all at once. What this does is put a soft cap on how large any emerging civilizations can be. Anything beyond a certain distance in space from a given world will not be able to be held because of the time it takes to travel to it. With limited warp jumps the only way to reliably transport now, the civilizations emerging in this version of 40k will be stuck with far smaller empires than the Imperium could grow to. It won't be impossible to traverse the stars, but the age of Titanic-sized empires dominating the galaxy in 40k will likely be over for the vast majority of candidates. On the plus side, the whole thing does mean that the Tyranids likely won't be drawn to the Milky Way. The Astronomicon was what was constantly bringing them closer as they own in on the massive beacon that to them was a giant sign saying all you can eat. Additionally, Barabbas Dantioch making the Pharaoh's device go nuclear has been revealed as the initial spark that first drew the hive mind's many eyes towards the galaxy. They were mentioned as shifting course in the passage this happens in, meaning they were already heading somewhere else instead. Without the Emperor, there's no Astronomicon and no Space Marines to wage a massive civil war with one of the battles bringing the hive mind's attention towards the galaxy. They instead continue on to wherever they were first journeying to. No doubt they'd eventually come to the Milky Way, either because of something else drawing their attention or simply because the hive mind decides to go there next. But funnily enough, removing the Imperium in this manner also removes the Tyranids from the equation. Sorry, Nid fans, the bugs aren't going to come into a decisive victory here. They're going to devour some other planets instead. Maybe they'll end up in Stellaris or something. On the topic of no Space Marines, though. Another big question would be how a galaxy without the Emperor survives chaos. In my usual insufferable ways, I really want to just point at fantasy and go probably like that, since plenty of factions don't have an Emperor equivalent there, and they held out just fine until the real-world company decided the game line wasn't profitable enough. But I'll mostly give you real answers instead, because quite frankly I'm sure they do just fine. I think it's important to note that the Chaos Gods referring to the Emperor as the anathema and as their biggest threat is a double-edged sword here. While it does show that even those of us who disagree with him have to admit he's pretty good at killing chaos, it also means he was a unifying force for the Chaos Gods. It's something that's not too often brought up, but without the Emperor, there's nothing to really bring together the Chaos Gods. Plenty of their schemes and plans were done with the knowledge the Emperor and his Imperium existed, but he and it don't here. He died fighting a jumped-up toaster. The galaxy in some ways does become much more open to their schemes, but also by their very nature, they can't really take advantage of it as much as they could because they'll be at each other's throats instead. To put things in a more material way, Chaos also isn't going to be granted all of their greatest champions. The Emperor, through through's creations, actions, and treatment of the Primarchs handed the Chaos Gods not only 9 demigods on a silver platter, but all their legions as well. Well, this timeline, they don't exist. The Space Marines not being around to defend from Chaos doesn't mean nearly as much when oftentimes it's a Chaos Space Marine they're defending the Imperium from. The greatest soldiers of the great game aren't around to play it anymore, and so the Chaos Gods are left in a galaxy where while their greatest foe doesn't exist, they also weren't handed an entire military force to work with. No grand schism in the Mechanicum to make the Dark Mechanicum either, at least not on the scale as happened during the Horus Heresy, because the Fabricator General can't just go and join up with the already existing super rebellion Horus was launching, because there's no Horus. Some Dark Mechanicum forces would no doubt exist, and Mars doesn't become magically immune to civil wars without the Emperor, but there's no longer one galactically dominant power for Chaos to draw power and followers from. They can't corrupt entire sectors at once by tempting the right Imperial Governor or General. A Space Marine chapter can't go rogue and take down millions with them. Schemes like the Interrex and the Anathema Magical Chaos Knife that turned Horus into a bad egg won't work either, because there's no ultimate target to corrupt and keystone things into bringing down the galaxy. Chaos loves mankind because they find it to be the easiest race to corrupt, and that will surely continue, but now they only have normal people to corrupt. Or at least no Space Marines and their demigod dads with a galaxy-wide empire backing them. And beyond that, the ultimate gain a single chaos plot can achieve is corrupting a single nation limited in size, not an entire swath of the Milky Way. With the Imperium gone, the greatest foe can never rise against chaos, but nor could their greatest source of worshippers and power. It'd only be the disparate human civilizations that rise up to corrupt on an individual basis, and as the Interrex shows also, these ones may not be so secretive about chaos existence and allow them free reign. Some places would be secretive without a doubt, not telling people about chaos since it's something I think only the Emperor would do, but just as many might take the approach of fantasy to different degrees, be that informing people as much about the dangers of chaos as possible, or keeping it as simple as telling everyone not to listen to the evil voices in the night because they're real. The biggest problem without the Emperor is in the warp, as the amount of gods fighting chaos and indeed the strength of them will be vastly diminished. Right out of the gate, it'll likely just be Kegarak fighting the good fight for a while, so the Haunt God will need to be ever more careful when he fights Slaanesh for a solitaire. So, on that front, things are going to be a lot rougher, as if nothing else, there will be no miracles performed by people like the Sisters of Battle that are especially effective against chaos. Perhaps in time, however, other smaller gods will rise. All of mankind's belief in the Emperor did supercharge him, but lesser amounts of faith spread out to more deities might instead create smaller and weaker, but far more numerous pantheons of other gods to rise instead. The spirit of Fenris seems to be an actual thing. Perhaps that sort of deal will become much more widespread. As different cultures form different beliefs, they coalesce in the warp and create countless pantheons of gods. Some good, some evil, but all allowed a potential chance at existence. The Chaos Gods will likely intervene in this, of course, and crush any forming gods they're able to, if not outright consume them, but perhaps if enough different beliefs pop up, they simply won't be able to keep up with countering them. Like the galaxy's most mystical game of whack-a-mole. Gods coming into existence has happened in both 40k and fantasy, even with the Chaos Gods being dominant. There's no reason it couldn't happen again, at least as a potentiality. A whole new world awaits this version of the galaxy, where beings that aren't human have a chance at some kind of galactic dominance, and a galaxy where they aren't hunted en masse. To once again lay bare my cards on the table, if you think that all the aliens that survived the Age of Strife were brutal monsters to a man that all jumped humanity when it was weak after the Robo-Revolution, then please take another look at Garfield. Believe it or not, the totalitarian monstrous state that thinks aliens are inherently impure and wrong will tell you that all aliens are evil. Doesn't mean you should take them at their word. Now that happened plenty, no doubt, and in this new age of the galaxy, there would still be no small number of alien scourges that seek to prey on those weaker than them. Imperium or not, this is still Warhammer 40,000. A lot of people in it are assholes. But at the same time, plenty of nice or at least open to diplomacy civilizations would no doubt be around. Be they peaceful civilizations who never really did anything, or those who were allied to mankind once and would do so again, the galaxy in this timeline is full of aliens who are happy to hang out and participate in galactic politics. In one fell swoop, the galaxy goes from dominated by mankind to something far closer to a Stellaris playthrough, with countless different species out there able to regrow themselves after the Age of Strife, or take rise now that there's less competition. What exactly these species might look like is an open question I've no solid answers to, because at that point I would just straight up be writing fanfiction fiction about a civilization I created, even more than this video already kind of is that exact thing. Most of what we know about the various minor species boils down to, and then the Imperium wiped them out, and for a large chunk of that lore, those species aren't even given names. We're just told the Imperium bulldozed countless minor Xenos in its wake, and that was their lot. Well now, all those species lost to history won't be. Be they good, evil, in between, or beyond our ideas of morality, now they get a chance to actually do something. This segment does actually come into one of the biggest shakeups of this version of the galaxy, the Rangda. For those unaware, the Rangdan Xenocides were a series of war the Imperium waged during the Great Crusade against a species known as the Rangda, who potentially have a relationship with the Xenos known as the Slouth. We know nothing about them beyond the fact they supposedly nearly brought the Imperium to its knees, and not long after the war, the 2nd and 11th Space Marine Legions had their Primarchs wiped out and their members reshuffled in the various other legions. They are the biggest hurdle to the rest of the galaxy in this early stage, and for once I'll give the Imperium the benefit of the doubt in saying they're awful. They had large amounts of slaves under their command, possibly mind-controlled, and were supposedly as ambitious at conquering as the Imperium was. And whatever the case with them was, the Emperor at one point felt that the only way to beat them was by opening the Noctis Labyrinth and presumably unleashing the Void Dragon on them. Scary stuff. Beyond that, it took 9 legions at their height to defeat them, which while not the full might of the Imperium was no small amount of military force. These creatures were monsters in battle and every bit as intelligent as they were strong. I have no doubt that they'd carve a bloody path through a good chunk of the galaxy, potentially enslaving billions on their way across space. That said, I think there's 2 reasons they wouldn't succeed, though they'd also potentially not be wiped out either. The first is that they too have to deal with the galaxy without the Astronomicon. Everyone can use it, it's just that most non-Imperial factions have no need of it. With no explicit mention of their technology allowing them non-warp-based FTL travel, I'm going to make the assumption they use it. This makes them every bit as reliant on short-range jumps and slowly moving as everyone else is, highly limiting their ability to control a galaxy-wide empire no matter how hard they try. Workarounds could be used, and they did have plenty of slaves, so they could potentially do it, but I don't think they'd pull it off. The second is a piece of meta-knowledge I rarely use because I'm too busy jerking off Warhammer Fantasy. That of actual history. With the Rangdan Xenocides being this great conflict early in the Imperium's history, combined with the facts that there were 3 of them, and the Imperium is in many ways space Rome, it's more than fair to say that these were the Imperium's version of the Punic Wars. And while real-life Carthage didn't have mind-controlled slaves or artificial attack moons, it's fairly safe to say that they wouldn't have replaced Rome had it not existed either. Carthage's situation in general wasn't really geared towards massive empire building for a variety of reasons. This is likely cheating, and just because they're based on Carthage, they're by no means a one-to-one, but with aliens. However, I don't think they'd manage it. If for no other reason than GW loves ripping off history, I don't think they'd succeed. To make things 40K-ified, I imagine the Rangda would remain as a potent power in their corner of the galaxy, however, but I don't think they'd completely subsume everything into their realm. A coalition of other factions, both human and other Xenos, would likely eventually stalemate them and force them back. They'd likely not be completely wiped out this early on, but given both the circumstances and the real-life parallels, I don't think they're going to bulldoze across reality as the Imperium did in canon. Now, with that out of the way, how about the factions everyone actually knows? And in my preferred way of doing things, we'll start with the pointy ears. The least changed faction by my reckoning is going to be the Dark Eldar. Their motivations are still to be the worst that enjoy the suffering of those they've used beneath them, which is everyone. Their being an Imperium or not really won't change things for them. As the setting progresses, however, I imagine things are going to get much harder in some areas while significantly easier in others for them, and by areas, I mean that in the most literal of senses. Based on what kind of civilizations pop up across the galaxy, some places of the Milky Way that might be frequent raiding spots in canon 40K will not be at all worth it here. Some empires that pop up in this vacuum are going to be just as vicious as the Imperium, if not more so, I've no doubt, treating the outside world as an enemy no matter what form it comes in. They could be human or otherwise, but Drukhari raids into these areas might see them shot on sight. That is admittedly standard practice, but since these civilizations will all be more centralized, it'll be harder for the Dark Eldars to lurk in the corners of a galactic power. They'll be much more frequently coming across civilizations with a few highly connected spheres of influence able to much more effectively respond. On the flip side, the Dark Eldar are one of those aliens that you can't really blame for wanting dead. Plenty of weaker civilizations will be ripe for enslavement, perhaps to the level the Dark Eldar can get real footholds in real space through puppet states. Failing that, plenty of civilizations will get the Tau treatment and only find out after an entire planet is kidnapped that the Dark Eldar should be on the exterminate list. Aside from that, though, business as usual. The specifics of how they interact with the world may vary from region to region, but they're still gonna be the worst. As for the rest of the Eldar, I'd wager they'd be in a much better spot. It's fairly glossed over, but early interactions between Imperium and Eldar weren't great, although admittedly admittedly, you don't really need to go into lore too much to know that. It was a lot of war, and I will for once admit oftentimes both sides were causing it. Imperium more often than not, remember that Lorgar razed a craft world to the ground and 3 legions once butchered an Exodite world, also something Vulcan Eldar child, but every now and again the Eldar would foresee some great consequence and raise an Imperial planet to prevent it. I'm an Eldar fan, so quite frankly I can't blame them for not usually trying diplomacy with the Imperium. It tends to not listen, but war is war, and the Eldar didn't shy away from it when absolutely required of them. Well, now it'll be required a whole lot less. Few if any civilizations will be able to match even the early Imperium, allowing the Eldar a significantly longer time to rest and recuperate after the fall of Slaanesh. Craftworlders, for example, will be able to more safely take the time to adjust to the path system and the spreading of spirit stones across each craft world, and Exodites need not live in fear of a divinely led superpower sending wave after wave of troops to claim the worlds they live on. As for other threats, early on there wouldn't be many others to truly threaten them. Slaanesh is as always constantly on their minds, but they'd be able to devote more attention to her. Craftworlds Ianjin and Bael'Tan are able to effectively cleanse the western and eastern portions of the galaxy for millennia largely by themselves, so chances are good that that sort of thing would continue. If that was when they had to worry about the Imperium and Chaos gunning for them, I can't imagine things becoming harder if they don't need to worry about the Imperium and things like Chaos Space Marines flat out don't exist. Give it enough time and the Eldar may become something like an awakened empire from Stellaris, something that, while much less than they had before, is still a powerful figure on the galactic political stage. What kind of awakened empire ripoff they resemble is going to depend on which craftworld's ideology is dominant amongst themselves, or at least which one is the most prominent across the board. If Bael'Tan becomes ascendant, then the Eldar as a whole will be a lot more warlike in attempting to reclaim maiden worlds from those they see as interlopers. If Iandin's ways become dominant across the craft worlds, or at the minimum the regions where they're dominant, then diplomacy with the younger races will be a regular thing. Across the board, it'll be a mix-up of attitudes, since unless one craft world can somehow become the equivalent of the leader of the Eldar race, they aren't the most united of groups. But I can imagine as things go on, they'll become more active figures in the galaxy than we normally see them as, both because any less xenocidal civilizations won't be glassing them off rip, and because they'll have more room to breathe. A lot of the prophecies that make them act against the Imperium won't happen, not just because there's no Imperium, but because it's highly unlikely any one faction left will be able to devote as many resources against them as the Imperium could. In a galaxy full of smaller powers, no one can send an entire segmentum's worth of shifts after a craft world all at once. The Harlequins I can't imagine changing much either, since they're ordained by their very much still alive god to be clowns, and so clowns they shall be. For the sake of fun, I imagine that some worlds might have festivals for them though, the Harlequin version of having a craft world or diplomat step by for a bit. Everyone gets cotton candy and deep fry whatever the hell, the Harlequins give a stage play that obliquely warns people about chaos, and then there's a big parade with the clowns throwing psychedelic confetti across the world. Everyone has a good time except for the people who have a bad trip. They have a very unpleasant time. You ever get really stoned at a party and then really anxious because of it? That's what I imagine being a buzzkill at one of these Harlequin festivals would be like. Trust me, it sucks. To leave the realm of knife ears, however, the Tau. This is gonna sound bad, but I think the Tau have a 50-50 shot of coming out either the same or not coming out at all. The Imperium discovered them first, but thanks to warp storms blanketing their home system when they were cavemen, they were never able to purge them as was scheduled. That, and if memory serves, the Age of Apostasy was also going down and the Imperium had bigger fish to fry than a random species of cavemen. If something similar happens and no one bothers them, then the Tau once again emerge and likely have an almost identical early history, going out into the galaxy to bring a greater good. Alternatively, some smaller civilization that is still spacefaring and technologically advanced compared to cavemen might discover them, and if they aren't the bureaucratic nightmare of the Administratum, which is fairly likely, they might go meet the Tau as their cavemen. The result of that can range from anything to them being wiped out, to closely monitored, to outright absorbed into this hypothetical civilization. Either way, the Tau, if the coin lands on tails for them like that, can range from a client species themselves to wiped off the map. For the sake of giving them something to do, we'll assume they crop up as they did in canon, but it could go either way. If they do arise, the Tau will find a very different galaxy. Make no mistake, they do still very much want to bring it into the fold to the greater good. As no small amount of people before have said, the Tau are the good guys in 40k because everyone else is just awful. But their interactions with the galaxy will be colored by what's lacking. For example, they can no longer safely assume that sending a watercast diplomat to a world will be a near surefire way to bring it into their sphere of influence, which, fun fact, if you didn't know, the Imperium designates the watercast as higher priority targets than any firecast member. They're charismatic bastards to be sure, but I imagine they'll have to work significantly harder without the Imperium's god-awful living conditions for most people, and the hands-off approach letting planetary nobles get ideas in their heads doing half the work for them. In civilizations that are going fairly alright, they'll have to do more than then tell some random world you won't need to worry about your next meal in order to get them to join up with the greater good. In terms of them painting the map, I think this will hinder them far more than help them. The Tau have always been a smaller power, and while this hasn't stopped them from being a player in canon, you all know the line. They're a player because no one else can dedicate the force needed to wiping them out, which in theory is something everyone else can easily do. Everyone else being roughly Tau-sized doesn't mean the Tau are suddenly a superpower. It means that a war with the Tau will require a given group's full attention, turning what for the Imperium would be a noteworthy but still fairly unimportant border skirmish into an empire-wide war for these hypothetical civilizations. The Tau will still need to try just as hard. There's just no longer the implication that if the other guy tried as hard against the Tau, the blueberries would become blueberry smoothies. If anything, I can imagine this hypothetical world forcing the Tau to become closer to actual good guys rather than the just Warhammer 40k good guys. By the time they emerge, the galaxy would have thousands of years worth of development and recovery after the Age of Strife. Power blocks would no doubt have formed by this point between various different factions, human and alien alike, and would they suddenly show up demanding everyone join the greater good, I imagine the response will be a similar, if somewhat less violent, piss off as the Imperium gave. The Watercast will be working overtime here because, again, they can't just go, "It sucks less here, come and join us," and be right almost all the time. And while they'd be equal, if not a bit superior, in terms of strength to any given faction, short of a craft world or the Drukhari, any alliances are going to present a functionally equally large wall as the Imperium did to them. If any sort of galactic political forum exists, then the Tau will also have to contend with whoever they try and pull a fast one on, informing everyone else that this group of assholes has decided to try and play Empire Builder. With that said, the dominant powers to be won't demand their deaths just for being Xenos. The Tau will likely have to become even more diplomatic than they are in canon, but they won't need to fight to survive nearly as often. With no Tyranids being drawn, at least not nearly as soon as they came in canon, they don't have to worry about that, and after they learn the Dark Eldar are assholes, they can learn to pick and choose who they talk to as they did in canon. Hell, if they play things right for themselves, they might become the head authority of their region of space, with various other civilizations being client states rather than outright client species of the Tau Empire. For all that they aren't as squeaky clean as they once were, the Tau are still willing to hash things out at the table and try and come up with something halfway approaching agreeable terms for all parties involved. If they find their greater good not only spreads better as a soft power sort of deal, but are also outright informed this time, there's a whole galaxy of other civilizations who don't like being puppets, thank you very much, they might find themselves going about things nicer. Chaos itself could be a good way to go about this, and no, I don't mean joining it. Wherever the demons show up, the rational and scientific Tau save the day with their railguns and mantas, giving themselves a nice reputation bonus and maybe convincing a few people to at least take a look at the greater good, if only for the toys it might give you. Of course, then that also opens up the question of how the Tau will explain demons as a thing that exists, which I think will itself depend on who their galactic neighbors end up being. If they're near a civilization with widespread psyker usage, then I think they're going to be kept at further arm's length after some watercast or ethereals try and spin their standard BS about demons not being demons. If they find equally scientific and rational civilizations, though because it's 40k, delusional is probably a better word than rational, then they'll likely have an even easier time of things. But how about we get away from this peace nonsense and switch from blue to green? The orcs, the boys who just want to fight. Surprising no one, they're going to be exactly the same as far as species personality goes. An orc is a orc, he just wants to fight, win, and loot. There's no sense mucking about on that front. But no one was expecting vast factional changes for the orcs, and I don't think anyone wants that sort of thing. I don't. An orc is an orc, and changing that's no good. I've instead got 3 different scenarios for you on how prevalent the orcs will be, but each of these does have a few different things going into them to create them, rather than me just running with a rule of 3s because I'm an uncreative bastard. Fork on the road number 1, the darkest timeline for the orcs. In this version of 40k, it's possible the orcs won't be much of anything to worry about for most people. And in some possible ways to get this outcome, yes, it's because the orcs are getting crumped by everyone else. While the Imperium was certainly a bastion against the orcs, it wasn't much for performing precision surgical strikes to cleanly wipe out the greenskins. In fact, some fairly common worries were that the Imperium was so good at giving the orcs a fight, rather than outright exterminating them, that the Imperium's efforts at dealing with them made the orcs all that much stronger over time. Other factions, however, were very much good at that precision extermination thing, most noticeably the Eldar, because no, the Eldar glaze will never end, and if that's a problem for you, then why are you watching this channel of all the ones available to you? If the various species of the galaxy are able to come together quick enough and put dealing with the greenskins as a top priority, it's possible they'll become nothing more than a nuisance. The Elder Empire may not have gotten rid of them, but to me I imagine that's largely for lack of trying since they didn't need to. Remember again, however, that the orcs supposedly devolved from the Krork. Lacking much in the way of solid information on how this happened, one theory that holds weight is that the Krork devolved because they had nothing to give them a good fight. The Eldar would just cast Power Word Kill on an entire army of them, and the rest of the galaxy couldn't hope to give them a scrap worth remembering. If this theory is true, then in the post-Age of Strife world, no one is around to give them a good enough fight to get them going. It's possible that the orcs fade into almost irrelevance, not because everyone else is too strong, but because they're too good at fighting and winning. Fork in the road number 2. Orcs is orcs. They develop much the same and are still the orcs we know and love. Disunited, prone to fighting anything around them, including each other, and all around exactly what they are in canon. Not really worth sticking around here, because in this version of things, orcs is still orcs. And fork in the road number 3. The Beast Cometh. See, the beast out there arose at least in part because of Ulanor and the Great Crusade fighting on it and all that jazz. But here, he arises from something else. The orcs got fighty enough that he grew from the ashes of the Great Crusade, and also a couple more of them grew because that series is weird. For all that the orcs need a good fight, if they can keep steamrolling through substantially powerful mini-empires, that might provide them the chance to truly grow to the heights they can reach. Alternatively, they don't grow, but they're just so far ahead of everyone else to begin with that all the various factions that will be popping up live in one of the few galactic timelines where the Imperium isn't the worst option. A galaxy where green is supreme and Gork and Mork's followers are gonna beat everyone to death for a laugh. For that matter, consider the Rangda. Imagine if the catalyst for the beast here was instead a war boss at just the right place and just the right time with just the right amount of boys under him that could kickstart a rapid surge in orc growth that culminates in, if not the beast arising, then at least someone as mighty as Ghazghkull is. The orcs don't need the Imperium specifically to grow, it was just the most common fight available. A fight's a fight as far as they care. They can get stronger if they're fighting Necrons, humans, or as it is here, the Rangda. I wouldn't say it's the most likely scenario, as it does require Warboss being sufficiently large himself and able to lead a sufficiently large enough number of boys to fight the Rangda head-on for a while. And I imagine if that sort of thing did exist during the Great Crusade, then they would have fought already. But improbable isn't impossible, and in one darker timeline for the Milky Way in 40K is a green tide sweeping across the galaxy from the wreckage of the Rangda. Pockets of civilization might survive in this alternate timeline, doing their best to hide or otherwise hold out from the greenskin incursions, as perhaps Gork and Mork fuse into one being to overtake the rest of reality. Bit messed up, and I don't think this timeline's terribly likely, but who's to say it can never happen? For a rather more upbeat factional note, the Leagues of Votann. Until GW does what I'm sure someone is itching to do and reveals the Leagues of Votann were intentionally made by the Emperor, they have nothing to do with the Imperium. The Leagues of Votann in this timeline I feel like might be a whole lot more interesting than they are now. Not to say I don't find them interesting as they are now, but I'm apparently in the minority on that one. But here they've got a whole lot going for them that might make them come out of their isolation a lot earlier than they did in canon 40K. To justify them not being an army for like 30 years or however long ago the original squats were eliminated from canon, the Leagues of Votann have apparently been hanging around the core of the galaxy where it really sucks to be if, unlike them, you haven't been made essentially custom built to survive it, or our dwarfs in general. This new timeline offers them opportunities not present in canon though for them to reach out. As a semi-related aside, with no major Imperium spreading abhuman distrust, it'll likely come down to individual societies to have the opinion of mutant good, bad, or indifferent. Plenty won't like creatures such as them or psychers, as hatred of the non-human was an exclusive of the Imperium even if it did double down on it. But whatever the case for the rest of them, the squats of New will have a slightly friendlier galaxy to explore. They'll also likely find a lot more freedom in selling their services and goods, as while the Mechanicus will still be around, and no doubt they'll view the Votann as equally abominable as they would in canon, the Leagues can avoid Mechanicus holdings, and that can be the end of it. The Mechanicum, as I keep forgetting to call them, would no doubt push the issue if they could, but without being able to sick the Imperium on a given kin vessel, it'll be much harder to do that. They'll also have the potential to become a sort of anchor for countless civilizations, although not out of actions they'll initially undertake. With no Astronomicon, remember, the longest warp jumps are going to be incredibly short, but the Votann shine in the warp like mini Astronomicons. It's possible that the Leagues might have found themselves in a position to become the richest fellows around as well as the most influential by virtue of this fact, because imagine all the countless ways they can utilize it. The kin could have entire nations worth of client states working under them to gather resources for them, notifying them when a particularly resourceful planet is found. They could potentially become outright empire builders themselves, as the only people with access to a Votann directly, and thus a source of light in the darkness. This isn't something they're much interested in canon, but if they find out the possibility is there, it might make them more prone to it, or at least propping up a power under them so they can do a lot of the hard work for them. At the simplest, they might just demand massive tithes from a given region in exchange for keeping a Votann still as a fixture of the region, as well as protection for it to keep it safe from the threats that'll still be working. Over time, as I've said, I expect the galaxy of 40k to become filled with all sorts of minor civilizations vastly different to what we see in canon. To give too many specifics would be pointless, because predicting 10,000 years of history is nigh on impossible, but I can make a few broad guesses. The Imperium has plenty of background fluff about how it's filled with thousands of different cultures. Now, those cultures can actually be seen on the center stage in places. Now, of course, it won't be paradise, even basing this on Stellaris as I am in a lot of ways. I'm sure if you know anything about how that game can go, you know damn well there's plenty of war crimes to be found. See, for an example I love giving, the guy who conquered part of a civilization, turned the people into food, and then sold said food back to their home civilization. But things will be decidedly less gothic, and potentially there'll be a lot more gods and spirits to go along with them. Aside from the Rangda and the Orcs as I've mentioned, the chief threats by the time it hits where modern canon is will be Chaos and the Necrons. I did breeze over them a bit, but Chaos isn't the type to just sit down and do nothing. Even if there's no Imperium to unify them, there'll still be plenty of humans around for them to tempt and whatnot. The efficiency of dealing with them will depend on nation to nation, with some going the route of ignoring it, some proactively dealing with it, etc, etc. Rather than a War Master, we might see a term from fantasy be thrown around here instead. Everchosen. In those times where Chaos does manage to unify, a single being chosen by the gods might ride forth into Materium to do the Dark God's bidding. No longer with Abaddon to act as a unifying force for these Black Crusades, their goals will likely depend on a given Everchosen to decide what to do. Perhaps one will have a similar grudge against their home nation, but after that, who knows what they do. We might even see an alien Everchosen, something even fantasy never did. As for the Necrons, nothing's gonna stop them from waking up. That's just gonna happen. A lot of factors go into how threatening they'll be. How quickly the galaxy recovers from the Age of Strife, for instance, will be a huge factor in how threatening they are. They'll always be a threat, but there's also the possibility for them to be opposed by multiple civilizations with Tau level tech or higher, perhaps as a result of the kin sharing a few of their secrets. But if recovery takes significant time, the Necrons might find a galaxy ripe for the taking, as the primitives that succeeded them have truly regressed. The Eldar, from a stronger standpoint here, will likely be able to provide greater resistance and rally powers around them, but they'll still not be what they once were, and likely still rely on similar methods of dealing with Necrons as they do in canon. Their biggest boon will be everyone else's greatest weakness, that they don't need the Astronomicon, and things like the Votann and Pharaohs aside, the rest of the galaxy lacks such a system. With much less organized resistance, or at least less speedy response times, the fight against the Necrons will be a much more gruesome affair for that reason alone. Civilizations can, on a case-by-case basis, respond much more effectively than the Imperium could, but any help they need is going to be coming slowly, if at all, depending on their relations with their neighbors. And some Necrons do want to subjugate the living as well, so the shape of a post-Necron awakening galaxy here will likely look like the worst paradox Bordergore ever seen. Necron infighting will likely be the key to the other faction's survival and potential victory here, as when the Pariah Nexus is built, and I see no reason it wouldn't show up again here, the resulting civil war will likely be the galaxy's best shot at dealing with their menace. All the while, Necron client states will be much more common and something everyone else is dealing with in these resulting civil wars, and quite frankly, I'll just come out and say it, yes, it's the war in heaven. Round 2 for inside of 40k, and also again the Stellaris version of it, as the denizens of the galaxy have to choose. Choose between standing with one of two Necron factions, going their own way, or potentially falling under the Eldar's banner if they've managed to stabilize themselves enough into a proper empire again. This is a galaxy with many similarities, but also quite a few differences. Also, I'm going to be mean to Tyranid fans now. When they do show up, I imagine either the Necrons will achieve victory and promptly deal with them, or the younger races / the Eldar will also have achieved victory and they'll promptly deal with the Nids too. Don't feel too bad though, Tyranid fans. This is after Lord knows how many other galaxies have been devoured, and countless Tyranid victories, if off-screen. Maybe this timeline is that of the Orc victory though, and the entire Milky Way becomes the Octarius War. That'd be metal as fuck. And that will just about be the end of this video. Mostly because if I go any longer, the feeling that I'm just writing fanfiction, or rather the reality of it, will become too much to bear. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the Imperium to my 40k. I could go on without you, but things wouldn't be the same if y'all weren't here to give me the much appreciated support. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Imperium of man, more like Imperium of stupid. Smellperium of smell. Stupid idiot of emperor, stupid dumb bastard idiot man. The cutting edge content and comedy you came for is here now, folks. I hope you're all as disappointed in me as I am in myself every time I look in the mirror.